that not all divorces or all breakups are synonymous with failure. The longing for love, for intimacy, for connection doesn't really go away.
So we know that 50% of marriages end in divorce, right? And people don't want to get divorced. So why do couples struggle like that? And what do they do wrong when trying to sort of fix conflicts in relationship?
Well, let me suggest maybe something first. I
Okay.
would like us to imagine that not all divorces or all breakups are synonymous with failure. When people have lived together for 20, 30 years, 15, whatever, when people have buried parents together, built homes together, raised children together, dealt with
Mm-hmm.
economic adversity together, they have done a lot of what marriage or companionship or companionate coupledom is about. I
Yeah.
think it's unfair and inaccurate and shame inducing to think that the only marker of success or the main marker of success is longevity. In this case, it's, some stories end because life changes, because people have fundamentally different needs, because there is a loss and they cannot
Yeah.
overcome the grief together. There are lots of reasons of why people divorce.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean it was a failed relationship.
Yeah.
That said, so this is the first thing. Divorce
Yeah.
means it's the end, but sometimes it's the end of something that was limited, maybe, but still very good.
Yeah. I feel like that. I feel like that with my last relationship, that it was really this incredible gift and incredibly beautiful and perfect for both of us in what it was, and had a chapter that needed to be written, but then it was over.
Right. The next thing is that divorce rate increase when women have greater economic independence.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very important thing. In the Soviet Union, 97% of divorces were initiated by women because there was economic equality. Everybody earned the same $1. And
Mm.
so we were together for all the other emotional reasons. And if those needs were not being met, then there was no reason for her to wash his laundry.
Right.
By definition, divorce is initiated more often by women, and the divorce rate goes up when women have an alternative. And that is a very important social factor to include in what we otherwise look more as relational factors, social and economic factors. Um, and But that means that the reasons for staying together become more emotional.
Yeah.
They become more about connection, communication, intimacy, sharing, thriving together. And that when that disappears, then the sense is for what? Now, I would add to the conversation about divorce today is that, it used to be that people divorced if they were really unhappy. Today, people will divorce if they think that they can be happier. And the
Yeah.
happiness mandate is at the heart also of this, is this good enough? Can it be better? Or the midlife question, is this it? Will this be the next 25 years? More of the
Yeah.
same? Is
Is
there
this all
more
there
to
is? Yeah.
life? Yeah. So all of that are part of the modern questions of divorce, which are very different from what it used to be.
Totally. And I think, um, I think people are more willing to jump out of things that aren't working. There's less reasons to stay together, like you said. And, um, and I think a lot of people try counseling. And personally, I've had a lot of success in my life and my career and business and in so many ways. But relationships have been my holy grail. I've had 3 marriages, multiple relationships, and I just can't figure it out. I was thinking about, who do I know who has really healthy, great relationships? Who do I know who's fulfilled and happy and satisfied? Who do I know who's like, really alive and vibrant in their relationship, and it's a source of happiness instead of stress or struggle? And honestly, I have a list, but it's a very short list of people. and
Yep.
your work really is talks about how, yes, relationships can be a great source of happiness and fulfillment, but they're also a source of stress. So why are relationships so freaking hard?
But the thing that you also said is, you've had three marriages and many relationships, but you also have other relationships with friends, with your children, with siblings,
Yes.
and in that sense, I would say that friendships, family relationships haven't really changed that much.
Hmm.
Parent children relationships have changed, but there is one relationship that has really undergone an extreme makeover, and that is our romantic relationships. We expect more from them than we ever have. It's an unprecedented set of expectations that we bring to modern love. And that makes it much more complicated than the particular expectations that we used to have for long term, basically, generally marital relationships.
And those things that we expect are a lot. We want people to be our best friend, our lover, our mother, our companion, our work partner, just all of
And
it. Right.
and we want companionship. Look, marriage or romantic relationship, well, they were not called romantic relationships. That's the first thing, is that they were quite separate. Marriage was primarily a financial arrangement. It was a companionship for life that gave you a family, succession, and social status. We still want all those things too, but now I also want you to be my intimate partner, my erotic partner, my trusted confidant, my passionate lover, all in one. And we live twice as long. Let's really add that, since you are the longevity person. We
Oh
live
God.
twice as long. And so
Yeah.
we are asking one person basically to give us what once an entire village used to provide.
Yeah.
And we even have gone a step further. The thing that many people talk about today is the partner as a soulmate, and that's a
Yeah.
very new concept.
Yeah.
Soulmate and one and only basically used to be God. Now we want it to be a person. And we basically bring to this romantic love expectations for ecstasy and meaning and transcendence and wholeness, things that people used to look for in the realm of the divine, as the
Yeah.
Jungian analyst Robert Johnson says. And then I want you to help me become the best version of myself. It's like love as an identity project. And Eli
It's a
Finkel
tall
has a
order.
beautiful image. It's a tall order for a party of two. It's a new Olympus. And as he describes, when people climb a mountain, the view at the top of the mountain is spectacular, but the air is also thinner, and not
Mm,
everybody can reach the top. Those
mm,
who reach the top have an amazing view, better than all relationships in history. But
mm.
so many people don't get there. Why? Because this is part of your question. Why has this been so hard for me? Our childhood is often, a few things that were done really, really beautifully and right, well, and then people who got either too much of something or too little of something, right? Too
Mm,
much
mm,
attention, too much intrusion, too much impermeation of boundaries,
mm.
or not enough attention, neglect, abandonment,
Yeah,
aloneness. Too much or too little, basically, is really what we can often summarize as some of the challenges of our childhood. And we bring those developmental traumas into our adult love. And really, Mark, this is probably the most interesting thing. People can sit in my office and say, I don't have these issues with anybody else. And I have long lasting friends and colleagues and
yeah,
students and
that would be
mentees.
me.
And I always say there's only two relationships that mirror each other. And that is the one that you had with your original parental figures, the ones who took care of you, and the ones that you encounter in your romantic life. That's where the antechamber, the resonance
Yeah,
box is right there.
and that's where all the juicy stuff is, right? Where you learn about
Yes.
yourself and where you discover the parts of yourself that may have more darkness than you like, or that are actually capable of great love. I mean, all of it is sort of in that crucible of relationship that shows up. And it
Yes.
seems like the pressures of expectation on relationships today are so high. Like you said, to be soulmate, lover, partner, confidant, you know, just grocery shopper, dishwasher, bed maker, whatever it is. And it takes us out of the sort of the story of actually how do we navigate this? Because
Because the
it's
needs that I have for the person with whom I want to renovate a house are not necessarily the same as what I want with the person with whom I raise children, are not
Mm.
necessarily the same as the person with whom I would like to experience erotic intimacy, are not necessarily the same with whom I want to travel, are not necessarily and
Yeah.
basically we have a model in which we really do expect that we can do all of those things and navigate these roles and flexibly move from one to the other, from the mundane to the sublime, from desire to love, from security to freedom, from togetherness to individuality, from connection to independence, and that all of this should seamlessly be, handled by two people. And that is a challenge.
Mm.
Relationships are complex social systems. Really, they do. And they involve a lot of complicated things, about how we manage expectations, how we communicate, how we establish trust, how we feel safe to be open and vulnerable, how we apologize and take responsibility for the bad stuff we do,
Mm.
and how we straddle some of these contradictory needs and emotions in one social relational system. That is really the challenge, but we don't give up. We are tenacious. You're still looking for love. You're
You know,
still
I'm
hoping that
taking a
you will
break.
have.
I'm like,
You
I
may.
got to figure out why I keep doing this, and then just kind of figure it out.
Yes, that is true. And you have said that before too. But many of us continue to hope that we will have that relationship. I mean,
Hmm.
the longing for love, for intimacy, for connection doesn't really go away.
No.
We may defend against it. We may say, I'm taking a break. I'm being chased for a year. I'm not doing anything. I'm not dating. But the need doesn't disappear, it just is on hold.
Yeah. And we often pick partners that are reflections of our unconscious challenges that we haven't really thought of or worked through or dealt with. And it seems like that's where a lot of us bump up against. So we're picking people based on matching some type of dysfunction in us that all comes out. And I wonder how you see that in relationships, how you deal with that with your clients.
I was presenting, an episode of Where Should We Begin this morning to a group of students.
Mm.
And it was a really, what I look for so much in that choice that you describe is what is the invisible complementarity, right? Here is
Mm.
this one person, and basically lives with a chorus of people that speak to her, speak through her mother, her brother, her grandmother. I mean, there's all these
Mm.
people.
Mm.
For every decision she makes, she has a Greek chorus literally giving her input. And she finds this man who basically at 13 lost his mother and father at the same time to through various issues of health and mental health and divorce, etc. And he is all alone, with no needs, supposedly, meeting a
Mm.
woman who has plenty of needs and never questions them. And it's a
Yeah.
perfect match
Mm.
until it is not. Until it
Yeah.
is not, right? Um, and she, you know, is very happy that he doesn't say much because she has already enough people talking in her head all the time. You have all these ways in which I seek you out, sometimes for the very things that you're trying to get away from.
Yeah.
And I can
That's
give
right.
you a few other steps to the dance of who chooses who for what. At its best, you kind of can say we reenact those things, we replay, we get this resonance so that we can finally work through some of these things. And at other times, you kind of say, you know, you were deprived and you systematically put yourself with people who are not particularly generous,
Yeah.
and you love generosity. I think that's something I would say to you. You are a fundamentally generous person,
Yeah.
and you often find yourself with people who are more in a scarcity mentality. And at
Yeah.
first, you are loving these people because you love to give to them, and then
Yeah.
at some point, you wonder, and what about me?
Yeah. I mean, Yeah, or the expectations get sort of endless, and it's impossible to fulfill them because you can't
Right.
ever fulfill that for somebody else, and they're looking to you
Yep.
for all these things. And instead of being self-contained, they'll often be looking to you for their fulfillment, their happiness, their meeting their expectations, and that seems like a recipe for disaster.
But
And
in the beginning, it's great because you think, I can do it. And I am honored that you think I can do it. And I love the fact that I can actually succeed at it. That makes me feel so good that I can give you what you need. And then slowly it becomes, you need too much. I don't get much myself. Do I really want to be in that role?
mhm,
How much is love caregiver? And at
yeah,
what point, and so this is that, the very things that are initially attractive
become
often become the source of conflict later.
that's interesting. But I think one of the challenges that I think for relationships is that there's a lack of ability for couples and people in general to have conscious communication that's not violent, that allows each person to share what their experience is without conflict, and that simple skill of communication is not something we learn, and I think that's where a lot of relationships break down.
And you want me to riff on this?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I want to know what you think because that's my perspective, but it may not be true.
So here's the thing.
Because
um,
you do counseling, and so you find that
I
you work with
do
people
couples
and
therapy.
trying to actually help them
Yeah.
talk and communicate, and you see the challenges that people have in hearing and learning what each other are feeling or wanting or thinking or needing.
So, I do couples therapy. I have a real predilection for working with couples because I find it one of the most fascinating relational systems that we have at this moment. This a couple can really induce bliss and hell in a
Mm,
level that is amazing. So do families, for that matter, and I work with families as well. Here's the thing. Um, it used to be that when people came to couples therapy, they came actually for their children. They didn't come to couples therapy. They came, and
really?
slowly we would identify that there was something maybe in the relationship that also was interacting with the challenges that the child was having. Couples therapy really became a discipline of its own in the center that it is today, when the expectations around intimate relationships began to rise. The more we expect from the couple, and the more we need couples therapy to help us with those expectations. When the couple was not the central unit of the family, but because the family was more important than the couple, and people stayed together for the family.
Yeah,
Today, not the children and not the family. It really will keep people together. They may keep them a few more years, but ultimately, what keeps people together is the quality of the relationship between the two people.
yeah, right.
So, therefore, couples therapy becomes a much more sought after practice. I don't just do communication. I was thinking, and I was editing another podcast session, and it's an incredible session. It's the first session of season 5 that I'm producing now. And they come in, and he says, we are both people who like things to be done, who like to do things our way. And I said, that's okay, that's interesting. But what I'm hearing also is that you are two people who like other people to do things your way.
Yeah, that's what they meant, right?
So then I ask, how did you learn, to say yes, and how did you learn to say no? And he begins to tell me a whole story of how basically his father would continuously belittle him, uh, lecture to him, be contemptuous. We would start with the conversation, son, and then what followed was often, berating him for all the things that he wasn't doing right and living up to expectations. And she grows up with a drug addicted mother, a father who commits suicide, and she is the adult in the house from that little
From when she
on
was
and
young.
raises her
Yeah.
two children.
Mm,
And
yeah.
they say to me at one point, we fight about everything, we don't communicate. And I
Wow.
say, I don't think you fight about everything at all. Actually, I think you're fighting about the same thing all the time. The moment he experiences you as saying to him, you're incompetent, you're not doing it well, you're not doing it right, he is in that original wound of him, of
Yes.
his. And the moment he says, "You're not going to tell me what to do," I'm doing it. I'm out of here, and he goes for a break. You think I'm once again all alone with all the responsibilities and the four children on my shoulders, and I will always be alone, and I will never have anybody by my side. And you fight about that original wound. That's what
Mm.
every argument is actually about.
It's the same story over and over.
And that was so illuminating for them, that it wasn't about the chore chart that she had made, and it wasn't about the kids, and it wasn't about
Yeah.
his parents. It was about, I don't want to be inadequate, and I don't want to be alone. Those were the
Mm-hmm.
themes that each one was really. And then we started to work. So that becomes different than just communicating. How do you say things nicer?
Yeah, yeah.
This
And how do
is
you how
this
do you get people to kind of move past those really primordial conditionings of childhood? That's the
you
$64,000 question.
Yes, I think the most important thing is that you teach people two things. Or you when I say teach, it means you help them see two things. You help them separate the past from the present. The fact that this brings back vividly the experience of back then doesn't mean that it is actually what used to happen back then. The past and the present sometimes feel like they come together into one, but they are not. And the second thing is that you then say, at 7, you were helpless. At 7, you couldn't respond. At
Yeah.
7, you couldn't just leave the house and say, "This is dangerous for me to be here." You know. Whereas now you are an adult and you have choices. So, and then you go and you basically help them, first of all, through the body, to separate the past from the present. In this moment, I get that tension, like I want to start fighting. Like this man was a master of defiance, but he got all his confidence through defiance, which means that it was pseudo confident. And when
Yeah.
she would actually say, "Go ahead and do things, I'm with you, I support you," then he would start to talk about all his doubts. He was always sure only when he was in opposition.
Yeah. Mm.
When he was in a fight, then he knew what he wanted. But when he
Yeah.
had somebody who was actually loving and giving, then he didn't know what to do with himself. And
Mm.
you go through the body and you track the feeling, because a
Yeah.
feeling is also embodied.
Sure.
Then you articulate the experience. And then you know what I really did with them? I really had a lot of fun. They had a lot of fun. I said, "Lay down, flat on the
Mm.
floor."
Mm.
And then I said, "Now continue the argument." Do you
or
know that you can't fight when you're lying flat?
yeah, or wait, if you take your clothes off, I think that's another thing I've heard from couples. Everybody take their clothes off. It's hard to have a
You
fight.
know, it's like we are meant to fight in straight up position like
Yeah,
mammals.
yeah,
So
yeah,
then it opened up a completely different, and it went from the fighting to the
yeah.
affect behind the fighting, which is often the fear of loss, which is often, will you leave me, which will you be there for me, etc. And
Hmm.
then you go deeper, 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 and that takes some time.
That's so beautiful. Well, Esther, you've been at the front seat of literally probably hundreds, if not thousands, of relationships in ways that most people don't ever have insight into, by simply the virtue of your job. Just like I've seen so many people who've been sick, you've seen so many people
Yeah,
who've
yeah.
had relationship challenges. So in that perspective, looking back after decades of doing this, what do you define as the success of relationships day to day? Like, what are the keys to a successful relationship, and what are the things that really destroy relationships?
Yeah. I will start with what destroys
And I'm
them, because
taking
it's
notes.
actually.
I'm taking notes.
I will really refer to the work of John Gottman and John and Julie Gottman here on what destroys them. They have a wonderful way of kind of separating between the masters and the disasters. And they talk about the four horses of apocalypse.
Yeah.
And basically, what will kill relationships is chronic criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, and the killer of them all is contempt.
Mm.
Because contempt, and this we know also in large scale traumas, is contempt is the dehumanizing. Contempt is whatever you feel or think is irrelevant and doesn't matter. You don't even reach me. So that those four horses of apocalypse, I think, kind of summarize things well, and one
So
could add a lot of
criticism,
things: defensiveness,
criticism,
defensiveness.
defensiveness, and stonewalling, basically shutting down, right?
Yes,
Shutting people out,
yes,
and
being walled
contempt.
off, and
Yeah.
contempt, which is basically the um, shame is one side, and shame is contempt for oneself, and contempt for the other. It goes in both directions.
Yeah.
I think when I once wanted to write a paper, I wanted to write a paper about what are creative couples,
Mm,
because we talk about lasting couples, we talk about stable couples, but we rarely talk about what is creative couples, or what you may include in successful couples. And what was
mm,
fascinating is what you said before. The majority of people, when I said, do you know couples who have a spark, couples who
mm,
inspire you?
mm.
And people would on occasion come up with one, maybe
Yeah.
two, often none.
Yeah.
It was really scary to them, because if I said, can you come up with entrepreneurs, with
Sure.
artists, with writers, with intellectuals, people have lists of people that
Of
inspire them.
course.
But here is everybody wanting to be in a relationship, and not many people, can think about, yeah, I like that, I want to do this. I never wrote the paper, because what people ended up saying seemed rather banal to me, as in, I know that. But then I've been sitting on this thing for years thinking, actually, maybe it's not that known. But what they said was this, and that was very interesting. This is not in order. One is
Yeah.
admiration for your partner. It's not respect, it's different.
Mm,
Admiration always implies a level of idealization. Is I look up to you.
mm,
I admire you for who you are as a person, as a human
mm,
being, more than
mm.
just in your role as a partner, as a parent, as a,
Yeah.
voilà. So that was one big one. Two, the relationship is basically a foundation with wings,
Mm,
meaning there's a solid anchor of trust, and that solid anchor of trust interacts with the ability to take risks in life and in the
mm.
relationship, and to be playful. It's what I often have looked at, the combination between, or the integration between, our need for security and safety and predictability and reliability, and our need for change and novelty and exploration and discovery. These two
Yeah.
fundamental human needs. Um, I think that the best relationships have a nice balance between what is togetherness and what is separateness. People have their own lives. But before I even continue, I think the best thing to say is this: there is no one size fits all.
It's all. Yeah. Yeah.
I can't tell you one. It's like you with health. It's not like you have a sense in health that it's an interaction of different parts.
Of
But
course.
if
Yeah.
it is more of this or more of that, some couples have Venn diagrams that are completely overlapping. They do everything together. They spend
Yeah.
all their time together, and it works beautifully.
Yeah.
And some other very creative and successful couples are much more differentiated. And
Yeah.
actually, they have a strong core, but with big individual lives, separate.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there is no one size fits all. I really would love that to be actually my opening line to your question before I even say what makes for success. People who feel free in a relationship, that makes for success for
Yeah.
sure. People who feel oppressed or under surveillance, or who have to constantly lie or hide, or don't not say what they bought, or what is, that kind of stuff. This, those are major differences that I would add to the Gottman list. It's a degree of autonomy
Hmm.
matched with a deep sense of belonging.
Mm.
These two together is a beautiful dance.
It's beautiful, but I think there's some really practical ways that you talk about for people to achieve whatever it is their best relationship is. Right? Boundaries, routines, rituals. What are the kinds of things that you help people establish within their relationship to build that foundation, that structure? Because it's not something that we know automatically. It's not something we actually are taught. How do you help people build those structures in those relationships that help them get to that?
So it's very interesting. This couple that I was mentioning before, where he kind of walled himself off with no needs because he was all alone and there was nobody who could help him anyway. And she is like permeated by all these voices. I thought that I had done a rather limited session with them. I really thought, I didn't really reach them. I didn't really go underneath the noise, etc. And then I get a letter today that you never know. You never know about
Yeah.
how much some of the tiny things that I did that I thought were almost slightly, they were not. Basically, I would say it's one thing to say, how about you tell Esther about this, versus shutting your partner up and talking for them. Of
Yeah.
course, you want to bring something up, but you also want to let them tell their own story.
Yeah.
How about when you have a problem or a question about sex or about children, you don't first go to your mother and grandmother, but you also go first to your partner,
Yeah.
and you set a boundary with all the people from your family so that you can create a more sacred space with your partner. The boundary is not always inside the relationship, it's between the relationship and the outside world. How about you are able to make a request that isn't a protest? So say what you need rather than what the other person is or is not doing. Just make a
Right.
request and stick to that. And adding up these things, basically, they write to me 3 weeks later and say, there's been a fundamental shift. We haven't had a single fight. I was able to no longer go and talk to my mother about everything. He feels much more open to me because I'm much less critical with him. And I appreciate his openness. And that makes me more fond of him. And that makes him more sexual with me and more expressive of his desire for me. And it becomes the opposite of the escalation in the negative direction, is now a kind of a escalating and
Yeah.
the going up in the positive direction. That's the work.
Yeah. It's so powerful. It's so powerful. What are the things that you've learned after decades of working with couples and relationships that are sort of nuggets of wisdom that you would leave people with about that could help them with relationships that they may be struggling with? What are the things that people should anchor to? And of course, there's your book, Mating in Captivity, and the State of Affairs, and your podcasts, and all that, which is great. People should dive into that, and your TED Talks. But I just wonder if you could kind of distill down, what you've really learned.
The first thing I would say, and I think I have really, really learned it from, you know, the millions of people that listen to Where Should We Begin, is that you're not alone. These days, on the one hand, we have unprecedented expectations of our couples' lives, but at the same time, we are also in a machine of fake news on social media. So people curate and posture and filter, and you kind of don't know where is the truth. When people lived in the village, you heard the fights of the neighbors and you heard the frolics of the neighbors.
Yeah.
Now your best friends can come and tell you that they're breaking up and you never saw it coming.
Yeah. Right.
Nobody tells you the truth about what goes on in the couple's relationships, and
Mm.
yet, and then you're left thinking, we
Everybody's
are
great.
alone.
Right. Right.
They're doing great and we are alone with our problems. And so
Mm.
I think really Where Should We Begin showed me that when you listen deeply to the stories of others, you see yourself in front of your own mirror,
Mm.
and you don't feel as alone, and you get the tools for the conversations that you want to have. I think that's the first thing I really realized, that this is a unit that doesn't talk. Friends talk to friends, couples
Mm.
often talk to nobody about what's really going on. They
Mm.
may be struggling with infidelity. They may be struggling with infertility. They may be
Yeah.
struggling with bipolarity and mental health issues. They may be
Yeah.
struggling with unresolved grief. They may be struggling with economic hardships, with
Mm.
unemployment, with addictions. And they won't talk about it to anybody because they have to present themselves a certain way. And it breaks my heart sometimes to see how alone people are with some of these major, major challenges. So that's the
Yeah.
first thing I've really learned, is to make sure that that's part of the game too, is to give people a tool to make hard conversations less difficult. Um, the second thing that I have really learned is this couple that I was describing, where I thought, oh my God, this is, they really came in to say, we need you to tell us, are we broken? Are we beyond repair? And
Yeah.
uh, and I thought, at the end of the session, I thought, I don't know where this is going. And I have been so many times surprised by people where I think there's not much left here. And then
Oh,
when you change one thing, like this
yeah.
woman, she stopped trying to change him and she went ahead and took responsibility for her
Wow.
contribution, and she changed a few things about her own behavior, and it just unleashed a cascade of
Wow.
changes for the better. And that is a real important piece. Sometimes it looks like everything is interconnected, and it's like impossible heap of nuisance. And yet if you make one shift, it has the power, because systems are interdependent parts, to activate everything else. That's the
Mm,
second thing that is very important. The
yeah.
third thing is that there is a big difference between what you feel inside and how what you experience inside affects the people around you. You may
Mm,
be depressed and feel weak and hopeless and
yeah.
helpless and anhedonic, but when you are in relationship with those who love you, you often wield all the power,
Yeah.
because you activate everybody around you to try to make you feel better, to give you advice, to try to
Yes.
lift you up. And in the end, they feel defeated and deflated
Hmm.
like you. So power doesn't always come from the top down. Power
Yeah.
often comes from the bottom up, from
Yeah.
places that are not nearly that obvious.
Mm,
I think
yes.
we really don't understand enough the complex, interplay of power dynamics in relationships. If you want to change the other, change yourself. And
Yeah.
maybe the last thing I would say is, beyond most issues that people argue about, there generally are three themes: control and power, care and closeness,
Mm,
and respect and recognition.
mm,
Whose priorities matter? Who has the power here? Can I trust you? Do you have my back?
yeah.
And do you value me?
Yeah. Those are
And the
huge.
rest, these
Those
are
are
these
huge.
are the three major themes that many couples basically struggle about. But it comes in the forms of talks about sex and money and family and
Yeah. Yeah.
in-laws, and but that's not the issue. It's not the issue. It's the emotional crucible in which those issues play off.
Yeah. So it's the story under the story is essentially
That's
what you're talking
correct.
about. Yeah.
What is really going on here that I don't see, that is not being said? What are they really fighting about? Like the couple where she fights about being alone and he fights about being inadequate.
Mm,
That's, you know, care and closeness and power and control.
yeah. Incredible. You've created a really fun during COVID, a really fun game that I'd love to do and share with everybody. And I think it's just so fantastic. And we've had all the stresses of quarantine, isolation, lack of travel. Our social circles are shrinking sometimes when we need them most, and our relationships are often, you know, challenged. But you created this card game, which is sort of came out of this isolation lockdown, and it's a way for all of us to reconnect. And I just
Yeah.
love it because it's like sometimes it's heavy talking about relationships and love and working stuff out, and it's like a lot. But you created a fun, playful way to enter into the space of intimacy and connection and relatedness that I think is just so beautiful. So, by the way, everybody, the game is called Where Should We Begin the Game? And you just go to Esther Perel, estherperel.com. Where should we begin the game, with dashes in between each word? And you'll find it. And it's just fabulous. So tell us a little bit what inspired it and what it is, and maybe we can play a little bit with it.
Yes, love to. Let me show you the box so you have a sense of what it looked like. you know, I literally one day, as I was working in the middle of the pandemic, experiencing my own sense of isolation, my constant need to be in a state of vigilance, in risk assessment rather than risk taking, and lacking intimacy with my close circle. I just thought, I can't only, talk about these things in therapy or even in the podcast in the most heavy way, that is
Yeah.
permeated by this pandemic fear. And I said one day, I'm talking about the importance of celebrating even at times like this. I'm about the importance of self-care and about taking care of others and well-being and joy in the midst of tragedy. um, and I did think about myself. There was a very personal connection as a child of two parents who were Holocaust survivors and spent years in concentration camps in Germany. I had heard a lot about lockdown, and not 2 months or 15 months of lockdown, but years. And
Years,
I
yeah.
remember my mother always saying to me, "Honey, there is laughter in hell. You
Hmm.
don't survive otherwise. On occasion, you have
Hmm.
got to be able to look at the absurdity and the tragedy of your life and just, develop power over it and mastery over it through humor, through play." And it stayed with me. And so one day I just said, I want to create a game. I don't just want to talk about the experience of playfulness and remaining curious. I want people to have the experience. I felt that
Hmm.
during the
Hmm.
pandemic, we lost touch with the erotic, right? The erotic is serendipity, spontaneity, improvisation, curiosity. Everything that you go outside to discover, you had to suddenly be much more shielded from. And I thought,
Yeah.
if I can create a game on the inside that people can play together, I really will create an antidote to the seriousness and the heaviness of the moment. It came out that at this moment there was the perfect timing that it became connected to the social reentry and to the
Yeah.
anxiety of the reentry, and so the connecting and the reconnecting is even more timely. I wanted it to be a game of stories because, like my podcast, Where Should We Begin? I believe that stories are the way we make sense of our lives.
Yeah. Yeah.
Stories are bridges to how we connect with people. And so it's not just conversation starters and it's
Hmm.
not just, icebreakers. It's really storytelling
Hmm.
that can be done between strangers on a first date, between coworkers, or between best friends, basically. And it has, let me explain it to you actually, three components, three parts. So it has the play cards, which are really fun to hold in hand. The play cards, and play cards really have a whole variety. A text message I fantasize receiving, the best prank I've ever pulled off. It is hard for me to say no to. I'm surprised I'm still alive after. An important object I have lost. In my family, my role is the most unexpected compliment I've ever received. A friendship
Hmm.
I need to end. I mean, I just took the first 10 that appeared.
Wow,
And
that's incredible. So it's a way for people to get intimate with each other and talk about things that they don't normally talk about, and
I
build
mean,
deeper relationships
yeah.
with each other.
I had a dear friend this week. We were playing together, and there is prompt cards. So these blue cards are the prompt cards, and they share something that's changed your worldview from your teenage point of view, that you would never tell your mother, that is taboo, that you would never tell your coworkers. And so she gets a card, and it says, "Share something cringeworthy." And the next thing she receives is, so all the people, the players, submit a story card to the storyteller. And the storyteller gets to choose between the cards that were submitted, including one that they choose themselves. And on occasion, peer pressure is done with those little tokens, in which
Yeah.
I put a token on your card because I wanted her to tell the card a person I unintentionally hurt.
Ah.
That is cringeworthy. You
Mm.
see, you
Mm.
combine the story
Yeah.
card with the
Yeah.
prompt. And she
Yeah. Yeah.
proceeds to tell us about this dear friend. And basically, she introduced that person to another friend and just said, this friend is very rich, very fat, and very kind, and sends it to the person in question. And, everybody's going, "Aye,
You mean
cringeworthy."
by accident send it to
By
him?
accident, by
Oh
accident.
no! Oh no!
So it's multiple variations, it's a multitude, because you never get the same prompt cards with the stories. The prompt cards give you
Mm.
the lens, the vantage point to which to tell the story. And the stories are just
Yeah.
mind blowing stories that I've been
Yeah.
hearing. I've been playing nonstop. People I've never met, and people that I knew very well. And during the pandemic, it was all virtual, so I couldn't hold the cards. Everything was on
Ah.
a screen. You
Ah.
know, that is the big transition: is to finally actually have it as an object in your hands.
So can you actually play this online as well as in person?
Well, that's what you and I are going to try to do right now,
Okay. All
right?
right. Let's do it.
You
Let's do
know?
it. Let's do it.
So, for example, let's say that I give you the prompt card, share something that you've never told anyone.
Okay.
And I would put in front of you different story cards, right? One that you would pick. So this is different from the way we play normally. You can
Yeah.
play it in the committed version with all the rules, and you can play it in the casual version where you just make up your own rules, because the
Yeah.
stories are the stories.
Yes.
So a rule that you secretly love to break,
A rule that I secretly love to break.
or my most irrational fear, or I can't believe I got away with.
You want me to answer all
From
three or just one?
No, you pick one of them. Share something you've never told anyone. A rule I secretly love to break. My most irrational fear. I can't believe I got away with.
Gosh, there's so many things in there. I get to pick one.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
mm, what did I secretly get away with? What is my most irrational fear?
Or
Um,
something that you can't believe you got away with. You've done so many mischievous things, my dear.
um, what have I can't believe I got away with?
No, you don't have to pick that one. You pick
No,
whichever
no.
one you want.
I think my most irrational fear might be like a fear of sharks. I'm like, I definitely get freaked out in the ocean. I control it, but I'm always like spinning in my head about being attacked by a shark, particularly when I was in Hawaii all winter and there were like 3 or 4 shark attacks. And I was like, you know, just feeling, and maybe it's not irrational, but it definitely, it's probably not, the likelihood of getting bitten by a shark is pretty low. So I think I kind of over react to
And
the
what's the image? What's the gory image? What's the idea?
images.
What is the
Images
shark?
like shark coming and biting my leg off and just being bleeding all over. Just like all the images I've seen of shark attacks in oceans. I think it was because of Jaws. When I was like 13, I saw Jaws and it just ruined me for life.
Right, 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 right.
So that's a big
And
one.
but it doesn't stop you,
It doesn't stop
right?
me, but it no, it
Right.
doesn't stop me. But I definitely feel anxious and stressed. Um, and what did I not get? What did I get away with that I don't can't believe I got away with? Uh,
I
it's more of
do the things I do that I love so much.
yeah, like I can't believe I actually get paid for doing what I do and like actually, you know, get to have this blessed life that I did. I mean, it's like how do I get away with being so blessed? It's like I kind of try to receive it, but I'm like, wow, like I feel so blessed to have, because I see people struggle with finding the meaning of life and being physically healthy and having meaningful, relationships with their community and having, just goodness in their life. And I just like can't believe I get all the magic that I get. Like I'm like, so, so I think it's, someone said it's a reflection of how much you give in the world, but I don't know. I always feel like
I
overabundance
was
for me.
just going to say the same thing. I
Yeah.
was going to say the same thing. I mean, you are fundamentally a life lover,
Yeah.
and you love to live life at its fullest, and you give in that way, but you don't feel that you're giving because you feel that you receive while you give.
Yeah. It's true.
Which, by the way, are two very, very important verbs that I work with in my work with couples a lot.
Give and
It,
receive.
yes, well, there's 7 key verbs. Since I speak many languages, what you were saying before, I've always really enjoyed looking at love as a vocabulary and a language, and what
Yeah.
are the key verbs that you need to be able to conjugate so that you can start to speak that language.
Mm.
In every language, there are a few basic verbs that become the structure of the
Yeah.
language. So
Yeah.
in relationships, it is to ask.
Ah.
How do you feel about asking? Can you ask? Do you
Mm.
feel comfortable asking? Do you feel deserving of asking and therefore deserving of receiving because you
Yeah.
ask?
Yeah.
Do you never ask because you don't want to owe? Do you never ask because you don't know what you need? I mean, the whole
Yeah.
exploration of the verb to ask, to
Ask.
give.
Yeah.
Do you enjoy giving? Do you find that you give in order to acquit yourself of a debt? Do you feel that you give in order to then be able to ask? Do you feel enriched by the giving? Do you feel depleted by it? Do you
Mm.
calculate how much you give?
Yeah.
What is your experience of giving? Do you feel that you were given to? What is your experience around receiving? And you can use these verbs in the relational sense or even in the sexual sense, right? In my
Mm.
work around sexuality, I use the same verbs. How do you
Mm.
feel about receiving? Does it feel good? Does it feel deserving? Does it feel too passive, too weak, too at the mercy of, too dependent, too something? Or does
Mm.
it actually really, feel like filling you up, etc.? So to ask, to give, to receive, to take,
Mm.
like little
It
children.
doesn't.
It's mine, my toy,
Yeah.
I
That doesn't
hold.
seem like a good one.
Or no, to take. It's also a way of saying I don't need to just never eat because I feel like other people are more hungry. I can take a piece. It's fine. There is enough for everybody. I don't stand out. I'm not greedy. I'm not too much. Taking is a very important verb, and certainly sexually, taking is an important verb as well. To share, to imagine, to play, to want, and to refuse.
Mm.
Because if you can't say
Wow.
no, you don't really have a good experience of knowing how to say yes. And so these verbs really kind of are, they're neutral, they're rich, they're deep. Everybody can interpret them in their own way. They're a fantastic set of conversations. They're all included in the cards, but not like this, but they are part of the questions that and the stories that are involved in the card game.
Mm. It's so beautiful, and I think the ability for us to be present, to listen, to drop in, has been so usurped by our crazy modern lives and technology. And I think that's the beauty of COVID for me personally, was to sort of witness how much I was in a fast forward way of living that wasn't allowing me to drop into the present in myself,
Mhm.
in relationships, even in my work in the way that I wanted to. And so, having this game, which is just so fun and easy and interesting, it sort of
Let me
takes
read you a
us,
few other questions.
yeah, it takes us out of all that busy doing crazy stuff and drops us into relational
I mean,
work. It's so powerful.
I've sat in groups, Mark, of 6 to 8 people where one round literally took 2 hours. I mean, it's
Wow.
just gripping stories. And often people don't even know what they're going to tell. They start like you, yeah, I don't know, nothing, that's difficult. And then suddenly the story presents itself. A game is a container. Playing is the creation of a space in which people get permission to explore, to be curious, to ask questions, to open up, to divulge under the guise of the game. And so it's a fantastic container for creativity, for imagination, for
Mm.
surprise.
Mm.
And the storytelling is the oldest thing people do when they come together.
Yeah,
They tell
it's so true.
stories,
So true.
One
It's
guy
so
last
true.
week, he got a card, gutsy was the prompt. And then he
Gutsy.
got the question, gutsy. And then the prompt was something I need to work harder. Now, that was the story card. So basically, you get everybody to submit your story cards and you get to choose one of them, unless people put tokens in which they begin to put peer pressure. And so he
Ah.
picked the one that said, I have to work harder at. And the next thing he starts to tell us is about how he's always been a conflict avoidant and he always, makes everything look like it's fine, everything is fine. And then what that led him to, and it was just like, we had never met this person. We were a few people who had never met this person. And I'm
Wow.
telling you, don't bother asking, what do you do? The guy runs a mega company of, this and that and the other. It's irrelevant. This gave you an entry into this person's story, their
Yeah.
life,
Yeah.
and it was like, wow. And
Yeah.
that's the effect that you really want. You leave and you remember exactly what people have told you.
Well, I think that's such a key point, Esther, because I think most people are not really great at inquiry and curiosity and asking questions in relationships. And what I find is when I meet someone, if I just start to ask them questions and I start to ask their story and pull it out of them, and people are just so happy to share, and they never get asked. And it's such a powerful tool for building connection, relationship, intimacy. And it's what your cards do, which is what I love.
Especially now, people come to work and somebody says, "So, how was the pandemic for you?" Excuse me. And, do I want to answer? I want to say something, but at what level? What can I say? How interested are you really? So to create these questions that are basically containers, they provide a frame so that you can then improvise and be spontaneous. So you
Yeah.
get just the right amount of both.
Yeah.
You get rules, and then you get everything. Once you follow the rules, you get this whole expansive space where you can ask loads of questions that are relevant in this moment. One
Mm.
of the things that is keeping me up at night.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is that, what I found in my
Mhm.
relationships is like when I take the time when we drop in and really get to the deeper layers of conversation of what's underneath in our stories and sharing, it's really powerful. And I didn't do these cards, but I did another set with my wife. And it was just such a beautiful way for us to learn about each other, to understand what moves us and motivates us and what lifts us up, what scares us, what inspires us. And I think, we don't really have many of those opportunities in life. And it's just such a beautiful invitation that you've created.
So we have the safe version for work, so that you can take out all the cards that have a pink
Oh,
triangle, which are
oh,
the
you
ones that
do.
are for the date and for the sex.
Oh,
And
okay.
then,
All
so
right.
yes, you can, so that it has its multiple settings where you can play. And what are the questions that are suitable here and maybe not suitable there? So it's done for you, so you don't have to constantly worry and fret. Can I ask this? Is this too personal? Is this
Yeah.
okay? You get the permission because you've picked the colors that you're going to be playing with. But yes, curiosity, active listening, asking for more. My favorite question in therapy, but also in the game, is tell me more.
Tell me more.
Tell me more.
That's the joke of the therapist, though. It's like, tell me more. What do you think about that? It's like,
Tell me more.
and then and
You
then
know,
and then
but there always is more.
yeah,
That's the
there's
interesting.
always more.
There
There's always
always
more.
is more.
Yeah, there's always more. Yeah. You want to know my secrets for living a long and happy and healthy life? Well, all I have to do is check out my weekly newsletter, Mark's Picks, where I share my favorite tips for health, longevity, well-being, and lots more. Check it out and link below. Thank you so much for everything you do and inspiring so many and helping people navigate a very tough landscape, which is much harder than disease. Honestly, I think you do is much harder than what I do.
But they interconnect, Mark.
Of course.
Relational health and physical health. I mean, we didn't even touch on that. How
Yeah.
much these two are related. You
Yeah.
know, stress at home, domestic violence, the pressures of caretaking go directly into your body.
Yeah. It's
Right?
true.
I mean,
It's true.
that's a whole other subject, but we,
Well,
we are closer sometimes.
the interesting thing about that, just to finish, is that women tend to live longer when they're alone, and men tend to live longer when they're in marriages and relationships. So I don't know what that says about
Yes,
dynamics of relationship that maybe don't serve women as well as men sometimes.
that's an old set of research, that
Mm,
the quality of life of a woman, emotionally speaking, is often diminished when she's in a marriage, and the quality of health of a man in a relationship is increased, and that has to do with the dynamics of power and caregiving and responsibility,
yeah,
or what
for
we call
sure.
emotional labor.
For sure. For
So
sure.
much more things we could talk about, but
Oh, thank you. Hey YouTube, if you like this video, you're gonna love the next one. Click on it to check it out today. If someone's listening and they have depression, anxiety, mental health issues, what are the ways of eating that actually cause a problem? And then we'll get into what are the ways of eating that actually can fix the problem.
Yeah, that's
then we'll get into the
such a
supplement
great question.